What's growing on, gardeners? It's Saturday, July 20th, and it is hard to believe, but we are already more than halfway through the growing season here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina. And about this time of year, I like to start reflecting both on the season that's gone by and on previous years, and think of all the different things I've done right and I've done wrong. Over the years, I've made a lot of great decisions, but I've also made a lot of big mistakes along the way. And on today's video, I'm going to take all of that knowledge that I've accumulated over the years and share with you 8 huge, enormous mistakes that I would never make again, knowing what I know now.
If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and check out my Amazon store and Spreadshop links in the video description for everything I use in my garden and awesome custom apparel and gear.
I spent the first 31 years of my life growing up in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and I moved down here to the southeastern coast of North Carolina in the fall of 2017. Shortly after that, in spring of 2018, I started picking up my camera and filming my garden journey. And I had a lot to learn because when I moved down here, the climate was extremely different. Over the last 6.5 years, I've done my best to document my journey along the way and share with you all of the things that I've learned. However, one thing I've tried to be transparent with you is that I have never considered this property that I live on right here to be my forever home, because it's a 1/4 acre in a subdivision with an HOA. And while it was a great starter home for me, it's the first home I ever earned, it's not the place I wanted to lay down roots and spend forever at. So because I never considered my current home to be my forever home, I have largely dedicated my yard and garden for experimental purposes. I've done a ton of things out of the norm along the way. And because of my experimentation, I have found out life-changing things like the beauties and wonders of shade cloth and drip irrigation. I've become very good at fertilizing and pruning. I've become very good at vertical gardening, and my experimentation has helped me accomplish these things. But along the way, I've also had a tremendous number of failures, and that is what I want to really share with you, because everything in my yard and garden has been experimental, and this is the first time I've ever completely on my own built a yard and garden like this. I have made a lot of mistakes that when I eventually have more land not in an HOA somewhere else, I will carry with me, and I'm hoping I can share all of those mistakes with you so I can make them so you don't have to. These 8 big mistakes that I'm going to share with you are mistakes I would never make again if I were starting my garden all over again from scratch. And big mistake number 1 is I would make my raised garden beds deeper. When I moved here in 2017, I was broke as a joke. I had bought my house and I really didn't have a lot of money left over, so because of that, I built my raised beds with as affordable lumber as I could, and I made them all out of 2x8s, which have a nominal depth of 7¼ inches. If I could make these raised beds all over again, I'd at least use 2x10s, but probably 2x12s, or maybe even build a second layer, because having my raised garden beds be so shallow, even though the bottoms are open and the roots can tap into the native soil, has created a lot of problems. Number 1, I have very sandy native soil that contains root knot nematodes. I did not know that when I moved here, so when susceptible plants like my tomatoes break through into the native soil, they usually get root knot nematodes, which slows them down and can even kill them. The other thing I learned the hard way is that raised beds that are shallow don't hold moisture as well, so when we go through dry periods, I have to irrigate a lot more. Had I made my raised beds deeper, I wouldn't have to water so much. It also means I have to bend over a lot more. And while I'm still pretty young and I can handle that okay, I sure wish I didn't have to bend down quite as much. So for those reasons, if I were to do this all over again, I would definitely make my raised beds taller. The second big mistake that I would change if I could do things all over again and rebuild my garden from scratch is I wouldn't even build wooden raised beds. I would get a modular metal raised bed. Now, when I originally built my garden in 2018 and 2019, these modular raised beds, they didn't really exist. These are a fairly new thing, so I had to go the old school route of building everything from wood. But nowadays, these modular raised beds, they're not only faster to assemble and lighter, and they will outlast a wood raised bed, but now we've gotten to the point where you can get them cheaper as well. Now, this raised garden bed that you see right here is 6 feet long, 3 feet wide and 1 foot deep. So this is already deeper than my wooden raised bed, but I actually bought the identical raised bed that is 1.5 feet deep. So it'll be about yay big. I ordered them for dirt cheap on Prime Day. I bought 2 of them, and they are way cheaper than I could actually build myself out of lumber. It would cost 2 to 3 times as much to buy the wood and make it 1.5 feet deep. So with these modular raised bed options, they are just so much better for the average gardener. If I were to rebuild my entire garden from scratch, I would go the metal raised bed route. Big mistake number 3 that I would change if I could rebuild my entire garden from scratch again is I would have designed my garden in such a way that I could enclose it with some type of roof structure. You see, where I used to live in the Northeast, the sun isn't all that hot and the summers aren't all that wet. And because the growing season is so short, I didn't realize how destructive the hot sun and thunderstorms can be to plants if you have a long enough growing season. And I learned that the hard way down here. The methods that I used up north just don't work here. And I learned that the sun is too strong and we get way too much rain, so now I have to pretty much grow my entire garden under cover. So my container gardens are under a giant shade cloth structure that I cobbled together, and I have shade cloth erected on my garden as well. But because I didn't prepare from this in the initial onset of designing my yard and garden, I had to basically cobble all of these things together. I had to rig up a system to make it so. So if I were to design my garden all over again, I would make it so I could build a roof on top of it and put something like polycarbonate roof panels to keep the rain off of my crops. I didn't know just how destructive rain is for most of the things that we grow in our vegetable gardens. In fact, a lot of the things like tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers and zucchini that you buy in the grocery store, they actually grow them in greenhouses because rainfall is just so bad for the crops. It spreads so much disease. It ruins the fruit, it causes insect blooms, fungal blights, it's just awful. So if I could do things all over again, I would have an actual solid roof over my garden, even if that means I had to make a smaller garden as a consequence, and then I would take the shade cloth and I would spread it on top of the roof during the summer to impart shade. Which brings me to big mistake number 4. I would have bought longer 4x4 posts. Now, I knew when I was building my garden, I wanted to have cables erected all over it to trellis up them. And that decision was absolutely fantastic. But the problem is, I bought 10-foot 4x4s as a method of cost saving. And because they're all embedded in the ground about 36 inches, they only have a projection of a little over 7 feet, and then the cables are a little bit lower than that. So because I only have about a 7-foot trellis height, less the foot or so of the raised bed, once my plants reach 6 feet in height, they pretty much top out the trellis. And that was way too short. If I could do it all over again, I would have easily bought 12-foot 4x4s in order to give me a taller trellis. But the inadequate height of the cable trellis is not my biggest problem. Now that I know that I have to grow underneath a shade cloth in summer, because the cables are too low, the shade cloth actually winds up sagging down too much and I can't walk underneath it. If I were to have bought 12-foot 4x4s, it would have given enough projection that the shade cloth would fit. So because now I know that I have to have some type of roof over my garden, I would make sure that I went with taller 4x4 posts. Big mistake number 5 that I sure wish I could have a do-over on is I never would have planted my asparagus crowns in a raised bed in the middle of my garden. While the asparagus themselves are absolutely thriving, I did not know how invasive the roots are. So I find asparagus roots crawling into these perimeter raised beds here, in this raised bed that I have some carrots in right now, they are spreading. And I also didn't anticipate that because of my long growing season, the asparagus would get this bushy. So because of that, I basically can't work in this raised bed right here. This raised bed right here has to be pretty much relegated for wintertime gardening because it's just so bushy. I don't want to be here right now. I feel like I'm locked in a closet. So this is not something that I would recommend anybody do. make sure you give your asparagus more room. If I could do this all over again, I would plant my asparagus probably in between some fruit trees as basically an understory of sorts. I would have planted them in between, say, my apple trees or my fig trees or something like that. Something with really vigorous roots that would actually keep a check on the asparagus. Or I just would have planted them off to the side, segregated from the rest of my garden. But hey, live and learn the hard way. Oh, that's good. Big mistake number 6 I would never make again if I could start all over is I wouldn't have planted so many banana plants around my yard. Currently, I have 7 banana mats growing around my yard, and it is just way too much. When I moved here in 2017, I was so excited to leave the long, cold, dreary winters of the Northeast behind that I started planting tropicals around my yard. But there's a problem. I live in Zone 8. I don't live in the tropics. And while I have been successful growing bananas for fruit here, as you can see, there are some years, like last year, where I didn't get a single banana rack. I went through all the trouble of building cages around all my bananas, stuffing them with straw for nothing because we had a bad winter from 2022 to 2023. In fact, these 4 banana mats that you see right here have never yielded a single bunch of bananas for me. These 2 varieties are the same, so they're completely redundant. This variety outright died over the last winter, even though I protected it, and this one has not borne any fruit for me. So all of these plants and all of the maintenance I've been doing over the years has really been for nothing. And again, that's simply a consequence of me living in Zone 8B. Bananas are a Zone 10B plant. They can't tolerate frost and freeze. So if you get frost and freeze, you risk them dying back and not doing too well. Over the years, I have learned that I can grow things like citrus and avocado trees in ground, but that's because these cold hardy varieties are Zone 9 plants. I can tend to plants that are 1 hardiness zone above me, but I can't handle 2 full hardiness zones, unfortunately. So I'm not saying don't push yourself. Here in Zone 8, I absolutely still would grow a banana, but I wouldn't grow 7 of them. It's just too much. It's too much work for not a whole lot of fruit. So what I would do is I would grow only 1 banana mat and really focus on protecting it very well throughout the winter and basically tend to that. Don't plant them all over the place because it's just more trouble than it's worth. I just can't grow them reliably enough here. It's just too cold. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dig up this old corm and I'm going to dig up this redundant corm. I'll leave these 2 on the ends, but I will probably grow something else in the center here that will do a lot better here. Big mistake number 7 that I wouldn't make again if I could do things all over again from scratch is I would have planted my fruit trees with a more permaculture mindset. Instead of planting the same things right next to each other, I would plant things more in a canopy, forest floor, and an intermediate level setup. For example, you just saw all of my bananas all in a row that I have right here. Well, I have all of my fig trees that are in one big row right here, planted side by side with nothing in between. And because of that, I'm not making the best use of space. So I'm slowly starting to correct this on the other side of my yard. Here you have my apple trees, which I originally planted all next to each other, and you have to because they need cross-pollination. But underneath them, I've planted strawberry plants. So I'm trying to grow the strawberries as a natural ground cover. Then I'm growing things like parsley in between my apple trees, which has largely gone to seed, but that will reseed and I will get more parsley plants. Over here, I actually have a sage plant that I'm growing in between my peach tree and my Asian pear. So instead of just having a peach tree and an Asian pear, I'm going to have a nice big sage plant. I'm going to have strawberries planted. I just bought a lemongrass plant that I'm going to plant in between something. I haven't quite figured that out yet. I'm even starting to put raised bed gardens in between my fruit trees. For example, I have an olive tree right here, and I have an all-in-one self-fertile almond tree right here. And the idea is, as the canopies grow, they will shade this raised bed and protect it from both the harsh sun here in the summer and heavy rainfall. And don't worry, I line the bottom of this raised bed right here so the roots of the fruit trees will not intrude into the soil. So by interplanting all of these different things in the orientations I just showed you, not only does that give me bigger harvests per square foot of my yard because I'm making a better, more efficient use of space, but it also helps reduce insect pest pressure because things are planted randomly all over the place instead of planted in big straight lines. So it is harder for insect pests to hone in on their target plants. And big mistake number 8 that I wouldn't do again if I could do things all over again is tough for me to admit, but I wouldn't be growing so many things in containers. I would dramatically reduce the size of my container garden. Maintaining a container garden of this size is just so much more work because containers, simply put, need more maintenance. While I love container gardening for so many reasons because it allows me to have more trees that I can collect in a smaller space, and they allow me to grow things that could never survive planted in ground here, like coffee plants. I mean, just look at these 7-year-old coffee plants. They fruit heavily every single year, and they are absolutely beautiful. Did you know that coffee could thrive in North Carolina? Well, they can when you grow them in containers. I mean, I just have more things growing in containers than I know what to do with. Hundreds and hundreds of trees, like my fig tree breeding experiment. I could never be growing and breeding figs if they weren't growing in containers. The container aspect is what makes everything possible. But the problem with all of these containers is they basically make me a prisoner in my own home. In the summertime, all of these containers have to be watered every single day. So I'm basically confined to my home. I can't travel, I can't go on vacation, because if I were to go, a lot of these trees would die. So I'm basically stuck here. I can't travel in the summer because I've built such a large container garden. Yes, there are things that you can do, like set up drip irrigation and have it on a timer, but it's not 100% reliable. And what happens if you have a burst line while you're away for a week? Could you imagine if you had all that water running for 7 days straight? You have to have neighbors come by and check on things, and I really don't like being a burden to people like that. And the wintertime is only marginally better. I'm growing several types of very cold sensitive citrus. I'm growing dragon fruits, 6 different coffee plants. I have overwintered peppers. All of these things have to be carried into my sunroom to overwinter because they can't tolerate any frost or freeze. And that makes it difficult to travel in the winter as well, or leave the home for more than a few days at a time. Luckily, in the winter, it is a little bit easier because they don't dry out so quickly, so I can go somewhere for 5 to 7 days. But if you have a big cold blast, which is always in the back of my mind, I'm kind of worrying about the containers out in my sunroom the entire time. I had to actually install a heater that I could manually turn on from far away just to keep things alive while I choose to take a vacation. So these container gardens, they can be a big burden on you. With an in-ground garden, you can usually go away for a week whenever you want if you water deeply enough and you have a thick enough mulch layer. And when you live in a place like I live, it pretty much always rains at some point during the week. So the in-ground stuff is pretty much always okay. So if I could do things all over again, I'm not saying I wouldn't grow anything in containers, but I would dramatically scale back for my own mental health. And that right there are 8 big mistakes that I would never make again if I were to start everything in my yard and garden from scratch again. Now, for those of you who are longtime followers of my channel, you do know that last year I did buy some property in Central Florida, a little bit over 3 acres, and I took you on a tour of that last year. I'll make sure to link to that video above if you haven't seen that. But again, I am not looking to move anytime soon. That is a 5 to 10 year down the road plan. But what I will do when that day eventually comes, I will make sure to carry all of these lessons I learned growing here with me in the future. So for those of you who are just starting out building their yard and garden, or maybe they're looking to expand their plantings, or they just want to improve the setup that they already have, hopefully this video was very helpful for you. Hopefully I can make these mistakes for you so you don't have to. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and please ring that notification bell so you're notified when I release more videos like these. If you're curious about any of the products that I use in real life in my garden, they are all linked down below in my Amazon storefront in the video description. So expand the video description, click on the Amazon link, and you'll see everything I use in real life. And while you're down there, please check out my spread shop for custom merch if you want to support the channel. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope to see you on the next video. And if you have any questions about any of the concepts I outlined in this video, please ask them down in the comments below.
Daly was such a good boy tonight, so we are giving him some cantaloupe fresh from the garden. This is that honey rock cantaloupe with some plain yogurt. Dale, if we cantaloupe, what would your honey do? If we cantaloupe, what would your honey do? Do you want a treat? Okay. Tell me if you like the cantaloupe from the garden. Well, Dale wasn't sure what to make about the cantaloupe right away, but now that he finally tasted one, he's actually eating them. I think this may be his first cantaloupe. It was so sweet and so ripe. Good boy, Dale. Very good boy.